movie for you guys, and this movie reviewing, because it is Christmas Eve, I figured that I might as well review a Christmas movie. Most of them have been absolute shit, I've heard, so I really didn't know which one to choose from, because of the three, I haven't heard good things about any of them, but I figured that of the three I wanted to watch, for some reason, this is the movie that I chose, and that is none other than the movie that I was really not looking forward to at all and really want nothing to do with, and that movie is none other than Bad Santa 2. Now, let's talk about this, because as you guys know, I'm not a fan of Bad Santa. I'm one of the few, but I didn't find that movie that funny. I appreciate definitely its story, and I get why people do find it funny, because it did kind of jumpstart a lot of the really raunchy comedies to come out in recent years, so I definitely will commend it for that, because there's been some really great, really funny stuff because of that. But that movie to me was very mean spirited, was just really with very unlikable characters, and just wasn't really that funny to me. So when I heard they were making a Bad Santa 2, I was like, okay, whatever. I don't hate that movie. I don't want you guys to think I hate it. I think it's okay. I don't think it's a terrible movie by any means. I just think it's an okay movie. But I was really worried about this movie because there have been so many cash grab sequels, especially this year. There's been so many of them that have just done terribly, and Bad Santa 2 looked like it was going to add to that long list of terrible comedy sequels, and I'm happy to say that Bad Santa 2, after watching it, it's actually not a terrible sequel. Is it a good sequel? No, but it's not a terrible sequel. I actually did find some good things about this movie, and believe it or not, guys, it actually did make me like the first one a little bit more than I actually initially did. So let's get to the plot of Bad Santa 2, which the plot of this movie is pretty much exactly identical to the first movie. You have, Willie, he's still working as Santa, and he's still, doing schemes and things like that, and he's still a con man, being Santa, but he doesn't really want to be Santa anymore after what's happened to him, and you see that he continues working with Marcus and things like that, and basically, eventually, certain characters from the first movie come back into play and things like that, and he quickly realizes that another criminal is on the loose, and that is none other than his mom, who he quickly has to work with, and that basically is the plot of Bad Santa 2 overall. But let's just get in this movie and talk about the acting and things like that here, because one of the things I definitely will say about the first movie that I did think was good was Billy Bob Thornton. I thought he had this character down pat. He actually really did do a good job with this character. Even though I wasn't a huge fan of the character, I can respect Billy Bob Thornton really giving it his all when it came to this character. He definitely didn't hold back, and I thought for the most part he was still good here as Willie, but you can definitely tell that they really did not understand this character. I mean, the writers in general really didn't do much with him. In fact, I think there was a lot of character retraction with Willie. It seemed like he was exactly back to the way he was in the first one. It didn't really seem like he changed at all, and I really thought that while Billy Bob Thornton was good here, to me it just seemed like they didn't really give him a ton to work with, because they really didn't. He doesn't really have that many funny gags. I didn't really feel like he had a ton to do here. He definitely had some great stuff in the first half of the movie. Like, they definitely bring up some really interesting aspects with him, how his life is really repetitive, and how his life is not off to the start that he wants to. And there's definitely some ideas in there that I think are very interesting that they could have explored a little bit more, but unfortunately they just don't. It kind of just goes away after the first half of the movie, and from there it's a by the numbers sequel that has a lot of the same beats as the original, which I'll get into the directing, but Billy Bob Thornton in particular, I just thought was okay here. I think he definitely tried, but I just felt like you could definitely tell that, I don't know if he was necessarily bored, but he just didn't really have as much to work with in the first one, and because of that, it definitely did show in terms of his performance, so he really wasn't that great, I have to say, but he definitely is better than the rest of the bunch by far. Now let's talk about Kathy Bates in this movie as his mother, Sunny, who I was kind of looking forward to. I do like Kathy Bates. I think she's a very good actress, but I honestly have no idea why she was in this movie. She doesn't really contribute to anything. She doesn't really do anything different from the first movie, and if she was completely cut out of this movie, the movie would be exactly the same minus like one plot twist at the end of the movie. Other than that, the movie would go exactly the same way, and I really didn't see the point of her character. They try to add depth to Willie Chloe and her relationship, and it really does not work at all. It's very half-assed. They really don't try that well, and I didn't really find her funny, I have to say. I usually really like Kathy Bates, and I find her very funny, but here, I didn't find her funny. I found her to be really annoying at times, and I just didn't really care much for her character. I really was not into her. Tony Cox in this movie, I liked Tony Cox in the first movie. I thought that he was a little bit annoying in the first movie, but I did like some of the one-liners, and here, he seemed really bored to me. Like, out of everyone, he really seemed like he was just done. Like, he did not want to do the same shtick as Marcus, and it's probably because Tony Cox has not really worked in a long, long time. Like, I can't really remember the last thing Tony Cox did were those, like, terrible parody movies, and it definitely does show it's been a long time since he's acted because a lot of his scenes come across very flat. Marcus at many points just feels like an afterthought here, and I really did not care that much about his character. Christina Hendricks in this movie is essentially the same exact character that Laura Graham was in the first movie. The only difference is they try to give her more to do as this character is Diane, and it really does fall flat. Like, in the beginning, I'm like, okay, maybe they're going to give her more to do, but no, at the end of the movie, she kind of just ends up the exact same way that Laura Graham did, and it kind of pissed me off, but at the same time, I didn't really care, because I didn't care about either character to begin with, so she really wasn't that great, but there's way too much, she has, like, way too much screen time in this movie. There's way too many scenes of these two having sex, and it really did piss me off, but by far the actor, once again, who is giving the most energy, and who I think was the best in this movie, is once again Brett Kelly as Thurman Merman, and I don't know if it's because Brett Kelly just has this whimsical, childlike presence to him that makes him a lot of fun to watch, but he was really good in this movie. I thought for the most part, like I said, I think he was having the most fun out of everyone. I was a little bit disappointed with where they went with Thurman, though. You know, a lot of the first movie was Willie trying to help Thurman, and how Thurman really helped Willie, how he helped him, and it seems like neither of these characters really changed at all. Like, Thurman is exactly the same way he was in the first movie. He hasn't changed at all. He didn't learn anything. There's no mention of any of the bullies or anything like that, and it kind of pissed me off the way that went, because I liked their relationship, and it very much feels like an afterthought in this movie. There's really only two scenes they have together that were genuinely very touching. There's one scene, a laundromat, I thought was really well done, but the whole time was really thinking, how much better could this character have been if they actually did take him seriously and actually did take him in a interesting new direction? I just think it would have made a lot more sense to do that, because a lot of time has passed and the movie really doesn't acknowledge that much, and that really is one of the main problems of the movie, and that's something that we'll definitely get into when we get to the writing and the directing. So, the directing here, it's all new writers and directors. If you guys didn't know, it's a completely different director from the first movie. Mark Waters, I don't think directed the first movie. No, he did not direct the first movie, and it definitely does show. I mean, his directing here, this is a completely different movie. It starts off like the first movie, I definitely will say that. It's very depressing, it's kind of sad. I mean, the beginning of the movie is him trying to attempt suicide, and all these different various ways he does it, and him talking about how his life is pointless and things like that. And it's definitely interesting the way they do that, but unlike the first movie, which I think had some incredible dramatic moments, and I think were some of the highlights of the first movie for me, like I said, I always think the first movie should have been a dramedy rather than a comedy. This movie doesn't handle dramatic stuff well at all. I mean, this movie barely has any use of it. Anytime they do something dramatic, it's either really awkward or really just forced in, and it really did not feel as organic as it did in the first movie, and that's something I definitely will say when it comes to the directing here. And the humor especially, the comedy is very off. It's not at all like the first movie. The comedy in the first movie, as much as I didn't really find it all that funny, it was very deadpan. It was very subtle. It wasn't, you know, it was very, like, chill, very laid back, and here it's very, very cartoony to the point where I felt like I was watching a Disney raunchy comedy at times. It very much did feel that way, and I don't know if you guys got that same vibe, but sure, it's a raunchy comedy, but a lot of the humor is stuff you see in, like, a Disney movie, and it really did not work here. I thought it was really out of place, and I didn't think the humor really worked at all, and the screenplay especially, I mean, you could really tell they didn't really have much to work with here, and to be completely honest with you guys, I don't really know why we needed this. I don't think we needed the sequel at all. I don't really know why this happened. I don't know why it took so damn long to make. I mean, the writing here is just really, really off. The problem with this movie is that it tries to be a replica of the first movies. It's one of those movies that's trying to be a rehash of the first one, but it doesn't realize what made the first one so good, and it doesn't have the same tone the first one has. So when you lose that tone, it really does fracture a lot of the different things going on in this movie. Like I said, for example, they try to do a lot of really good stuff with Thurman and with Willie, but Thurman's barely in the movie. In fact, so much of the second movie is devoted to Willie and Diane, Christina Hendricks' character, that it really does very much weigh down the movie, and I just didn't really feel like they had much to work with. It felt very slow to me, and I really was not into the story, I have to say. I really did not find the story all that interesting, and the thing is, this one does have, in my opinion, more interesting stuff than the first movie. Like, this movie really does touch upon the idea of, is there a way for Willie to be good? Is there any sense of goodness in him? Can he possibly redeem himself? Is any of that there? And the movie introduced this really well in the first half, how Thurman was the one good thing in his life, and he was the one who helped him turn his life around. But then they completely forget about it. They don't talk about it in this movie. After the first, 20 minutes, the movie just becomes a regular, average comedy, and it kind of pissed me off. I was really hoping that they would have some more dramatic stuff here. They would get a little more emotional, because like I said, I think they handled that stuff really well in the first movie, and I think Willie is a very fascinating character, but the movie didn't know what the hell to do with this story, you could definitely tell, and especially with Kathy Bates, who, like I said, if you would have just cut her out of the movie, things would have gone completely the same way they did, and I thought that really didn't work either. I really did not think a lot of the humor worked. There were barely laughs in the movie. I didn't really laugh all that much. The only times I laughed were, in the beginning of the movie, and then the very last scene, which is one of the funniest things in both of these movies. I thought the very last scene was hilarious. I thought there were some good laughs in the first 20 minutes, but the second that Kathy Bates is introduced here, I really started to tune out, and I really started to check the time, and even scenes with Thurman, as good as Brett Kelly was in this movie, because like I said, I think he just has this natural energy to him that is definitely very well warranted in this film. Even with him, I started to feel very, very bored, and I started to feel like I really want this to be over very quickly, which kind of sucks because it's much shorter than the first movie. It's only about 88 minutes long, and it's a slog to get through. I was very bored throughout this movie. I really was not into it that much, and that might be because I wasn't a huge fan of the first movie, but I'm not gonna lie, this made me like the first movie more. I mean, the first movie, in my opinion, just had more interesting characters. You had John Ritter there, who was this, really good guy who wasn't at all happy with any of the foul-mouthed stuff that was going on in his shop, and he was the boss and everything. He was very calculated. He was really funny. Obviously they can't get him back because of course, John Ritter unfortunately died, but we know how he died back in 2005 or 2004 or whatever, and that was one of the last movies he ever did. But even though, things are like that, they don't even try to mention him in this movie. Bernie Mac was in the first one. He was really great there. He's barely mentioned too. And even the characters I didn't really like Laura Graham, I thought was definitely better than what they did with Christina Hendricks in this movie, because she was just there to be the, sexy character, but it worked better in the first movie. A lot of that stuff just worked better here, and while this movie I think could have been maybe even a little bit better than the first one, it completely salvages any opportunity to maybe dive more into his history and be more of a character-driven film, because it chooses focus more on gag after gag rather than be a straight-up, sequel, and instead is just a gag after gag movie that I'm probably going to forget the second I'm done with this review. So overall, guys, Bad Santa 2 is a very, very forgettable sequel. I think this movie could have been a lot more than it really was. I really think that this is not a movie that you really need to see. Unless you were a huge uber fan of the first Bad Santa, you really don't need to see this movie. At this point, you know what the characters are like. I'm not quite sure why this movie really needed to be made. I think this is a film that clearly, it was a cash grab, but there's definitely not going to be Bad Santa 3. This failed horribly at the box office, so I definitely don't see a Bad Santa 3 happening. The way the movie ends, I was a little definitely satisfied with, because the way things end, it was definitely a good ending, and I'm hoping that stays as the ending, because it was definitely a well-done ending. But in general, I really was not a huge fan of this movie. It definitely made me appreciate the first one more, to the point where I honestly could see myself possibly watching the first one again unlike this movie, which I could never see myself watching again. And oddly enough, I am actually going to give this movie the exact same rating I gave the first one, which is none other than a 2.5 out of 5 or a C-. Really thinking about it, guys, though, as bad, because of how boring this movie really was, I might give the first movie actually a C+. I really did think about it, and I maybe was a little bit too harsh on the first movie. I kind of want to go back and watch it after this movie, and after this movie, it just made me have a new appreciation for the first one. It salvages any opportunity it could to be compelling or interesting. Instead, like I said, focuses on gag after gag, and in general is not nearly as good, I think, as it could have been. But that's my review of Bad Santa 2. Let me know what you guys thought of this movie overall. Love to hear your thoughts on it. Did you enjoy this movie? I hope you guys have a great Christmas. I don't really know if I'm going to have any videos tomorrow. I might have something, but my next video will most likely be for a movie review, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.